The rain had been falling since before dawn, thin and relentless, blurring the city into shades of gray. He stood near the bus stop with his hands deep in his worn jacket pockets, feeling the weight of another uncertain morning press against his chest. His shoes were scuffed, his phone screen cracked, and his bank balance hovered so close to zero that even checking it filled him with quiet dread. Each passing car splashed water onto the pavement, and with every splash, a familiar thought echoed in his mind: is this all my life is going to be? He wasn't lazy. That was the part that hurt the most. He worked hard, sometimes harder than anyone around him, yet the results never seemed to match the effort. Bills arrived faster than paychecks. Dreams were postponed so often they began to feel foolish. As he waited for the bus, he watched people rush past in tailored coats, speaking confidently into expensive phones. A mix of envy and shame tightened his throat. He looked away, pretending to check the time, though he already knew he was early. Being early was one of the few things he could still control. The bus arrived with a hiss, and he climbed aboard, taking his usual seat by the window. As the city slid past, he rested his forehead against the cool glass. His reflection stared back at him, eyes tired but alert, as if some part of him refused to give up. Memories surfaced uninvited, late nights worrying about money, conversations he avoided because he couldn't afford to go out, the quiet disappointment in his own voice when he spoke about the future. Fear sat heavy in his stomach, but beneath it, something else stirred: frustration, sharp and uncomfortable. At work, the day unfolded like every other. The same desk, the same tasks, the same polite smiles that hid exhaustion. During his lunch break, he sat alone with a simple meal, scrolling mindlessly on his phone. That's when he saw it, a short article shared by a stranger, talking about a simple but disciplined financial habit. It wasn't flashy. It didn't promise instant wealth. It talked about responsibility, learning, and delayed comfort. Normally, he would have scrolled past. But something about the honesty of the words made him pause. He read it once. Then again. His heart beat a little faster, not with excitement, but with recognition. It felt like someone had quietly named the problem he'd been running from. A mix of hope and fear washed over him. Hope, because the idea made sense. Fear, because it meant change, and change meant discomfort. He closed his phone and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about how trapped he felt. He was thinking about what he could do differently. That evening, as he walked home under a darkening sky, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights, reflecting gold and white. He took a deep breath, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It wasn't confidence yet. It wasn't success. It was a decision forming quietly, almost invisibly. And though no one around him noticed, that small, internal shift carried the weight of a future beginning to change. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic drifting in through a cracked window. He sat at the small wooden table, the same table where unpaid bills usually piled up, but tonight it was different. A single lamp cast a warm circle of light, and within it lay his notebook, his phone, and a cup of tea slowly cooling beside his hand. The air felt heavy, not with worry, but with focus. He rolled his shoulders back and exhaled, as if preparing himself for something serious. He opened the notebook to a blank page. For a moment, his pen hovered, and doubt crept in. Who was he to think he could change years of financial struggle? His chest tightened as old habits whispered to him, telling him this effort would fade like all the others. He swallowed hard, then pressed the pen to the paper anyway. The first number he wrote down was his income. Seeing it in ink made it feel real, almost exposed. Then came the expenses. Rent. Utilities. Food. Small, careless purchases he never tracked before. Each line brought a quiet sting of regret, but also clarity. As the list grew, his emotions shifted from embarrassment to determination. He realized how often he had avoided looking at the truth because it made him uncomfortable. Now, facing it directly, the fear began to lose its power. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes, then leaned forward again. This time, he drew a line under the expenses and circled a few that weren't truly necessary. A sense of control flickered to life. It was small, but it was real. He picked up his phone and searched for more information, reading slowly, carefully. Articles turned into videos, videos into notes scribbled in the margins of his notebook. The more he learned, the more his mindset shifted. Wealth, he realized, wasn't about luck or sudden breaks. It was about systems, habits, and patience. That realization didn't make him feel rich. It made him feel responsible. And strangely, that responsibility felt empowering rather than heavy. Time passed without him noticing. The tea went cold, the traffic noise faded, and the city outside seemed to pause. When he finally checked the clock, it was far later than he intended, yet he didn't feel drained. He felt awake. Before closing the notebook, he wrote one final sentence at the bottom of the page, a simple rule he promised himself he would follow, no matter how uncomfortable it became. Writing it felt like sealing a quiet contract with himself. When he stood up to go to bed, he glanced back at the table. The numbers were still modest. The situation hadn't magically improved. But his posture was different, his breathing steadier. As he turned off the lamp, darkness filled the room, but inside him, a calm determination remained. For the first time in years, his future no longer felt like something happening to him. It felt like something he was finally beginning to shape. The weeks that followed tested him in ways he hadn't fully expected. The excitement of that first night faded, replaced by the slow, demanding work of consistency. Each morning, he woke up a little earlier, the alarm cutting through his sleep with an unforgiving tone. His body protested, his mind searched for excuses, but he forced himself out of bed anyway. Standing in the quiet of his apartment, he felt the familiar pull of comfort urging him to return to old habits. Instead, he chose discipline, even when it felt dull and unrewarding. At work, temptation followed him everywhere. Coworkers invited him out for lunch, laughing and making plans without thinking twice about the cost. He smiled, declined politely, and ate the meal he had packed at home. As he sat there, watching them leave, a sharp loneliness washed over him. For a moment, doubt crept in, whispering that he was isolating himself, that saving money wasn't worth feeling left out. His throat tightened, but he reminded himself why he had started. That reminder didn't erase the discomfort, but it gave him the strength to sit with it. Evenings became a battlefield between fatigue and focus. After long days, his mind begged for distraction, for easy pleasure, for escape. Instead, he sat down with his notebook and laptop, reviewing numbers, learning new skills, and tracking progress that seemed painfully slow. Some nights, frustration boiled over. He stared at the screen, feeling foolish for believing this effort would matter. On those nights, he let himself feel the disappointment fully, then kept going anyway. That persistence, quiet and unseen, became his new form of courage. Small changes began to show. He noticed his spending becoming more intentional, his decisions more thoughtful. The panic he once felt when thinking about money softened into caution, then into planning. One evening, as he updated his records, he paused and realized something had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't reacting to problems as they appeared. He was anticipating them. That awareness brought a subtle but powerful sense of pride, one that warmed him from the inside. Not everyone understood his choices. A friend joked about him becoming too serious, and though he laughed along, the comment stung. He wondered briefly if he was losing parts of himself in the process. Then he looked at his notes, his goals, and the quiet progress he had made. He realized he wasn't losing himself. He was rebuilding. Late one night, as he walked home under a clear sky, he stopped and looked up. The city lights shimmered around him, and the future no longer felt like a wall he kept crashing into. It felt distant, yes, but reachable. He stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling both tired and steady. The struggle wasn't over, and the rewards were still far away. But deep inside, he knew something important had changed. He was no longer just hoping for a better financial future. He was actively creating one. Change did not arrive with fireworks or sudden applause. It came quietly, disguised as routine, hidden in ordinary days that slowly stacked on top of one another. Months passed, and with each one, his habits hardened into something reliable. The notebook that once felt intimidating now sat open on his table like an old friend. The numbers were still modest, but they told a different story now, one of direction instead of desperation. He no longer checked his balance with fear tightening his chest. Instead, he checked it with calm awareness, knowing exactly why it looked the way it did. Opportunities began to reveal themselves in subtle ways. A skill he had been learning late at night finally became useful when a small freelance task came his way. The payment was not large, but when it landed in his account, he stared at the screen longer than necessary. That money represented more than income. It represented proof. Proof that effort could turn into value, that patience could create options. His hands trembled slightly as he transferred a portion directly into savings, something that once felt impossible. A quiet smile formed, not of pride alone, but of relief. There were setbacks, of course. Unexpected expenses still appeared, testing his resolve. One month, a sudden bill threatened to undo weeks of progress. He sat at the table again, shoulders slumped, feeling the old frustration creep back in. For a moment, he feared slipping into the familiar cycle of panic and avoidance. But instead of turning away, he leaned in. He adjusted, recalculated, and made choices that were uncomfortable but necessary. When he finally closed the notebook that night, he felt exhausted yet grounded. The problem had not defeated him. He had faced it and survived. Gradually, the way he saw himself began to change. He no longer felt invisible or powerless. When conversations about money arose, he didn't shrink or stay silent. He listened, learned, and sometimes even shared what he had discovered. The shame that once clung to him faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that did not need validation. He understood now that financial growth was not just about numbers. It was about identity. He was becoming someone who made intentional choices, someone who honored his future self. One evening, he visited his parents. Sitting at the familiar table of his childhood home, he noticed how different he felt. The same walls, the same memories, but a new steadiness within him. When his father asked about work, he spoke with clarity instead of uncertainty. His mother watched him closely, sensing the shift before he could explain it. Their pride was subtle, unspoken, but he felt it deeply. It warmed him in a way money never could. Time continued its steady march, and with it came milestones he once believed were out of reach. An emergency fund slowly took shape. Debts that felt endless began to shrink. Each small victory reinforced his discipline, but he remained cautious, knowing how fragile progress could be if taken for granted. He celebrated quietly, not with spending, but with reflection. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit alone and remember the man at the bus stop, soaked by rain and heavy with doubt. That memory no longer filled him with pain. It filled him with gratitude. The most profound change, however, was internal. He no longer measured success by comparison. The lives he once envied no longer haunted him. He understood that everyone was on a different path, fighting different battles. His journey was his own, shaped by patience, sacrifice, and countless unseen decisions. That understanding freed him. It allowed him to move forward without resentment or regret. One morning, as sunlight poured through his window, he paused before leaving for work. The city outside buzzed as always, indifferent to his progress. Yet he felt a deep sense of alignment, as if his actions and intentions were finally moving in the same direction. He realized then that his financial future had already changed, not because he was rich, but because he was prepared, stepped outside with steady confidence, knowing challenges would still come. But now, they no longer defined him. He had built something stronger than comfort, stronger than luck. He had built discipline, awareness, and belief. And that single decision, made on an ordinary day, had quietly reshaped the course of his life for generations to come.